Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our presentation today on OSHA's inspections process and a workshop on how to best navigate an OSHA inspection. I'll be your presenter today along with Kyle Zon. Kyle and I are both risk consultants at Hub International, and we're excited to talk with everyone this morning just about our experience dealing with OSHA, some trends that we're seeing in the industry, some best practices, and some ways you can position yourself to potentially mitigate the effect of an OSHA inspection. So Kyle, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Kyle Zon, Assistant Vice President, Senior Risk Consultant. I work with Phil on the Risk Services team. Hopefully some familiar names on the webinar side, some I see in person here as well. Looking forward to the session. We're going to hold questions, I think, till the end, but really looking forward to get started.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So I'm Phil Caste with Hub's Risk Services Division. I'm the Regional Manager and Vice President. As Kyle said, we'll be looking at the chat for questions. So if you do have questions and you want to put them in the chat feature, go ahead. We'll get to those at the very end of the presentation. And for everybody in person, we'll also take live questions at the end. So with that, Kyle, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you. Get us started.
Cool. All right, so here's our agenda for today. Not a ton of different sections or topics to run through, but as you guys can see here, we've got our OSHA most frequently cited. We're going to cover the general industry findings. We're going to cover the construction findings, sort of set the tone, and then we're going to talk through the top 5 mistakes that Phil and I typically see or hear about through talking with clients or just working with clients on this exact topic. And then last but not least, we're going to talk about how to establish a defense if and when you guys are issued any citations. So like I said, we're kicking it off with the most frequently cited. These are your top 10. And looking at this slide, we're starting with general industry. And you can see the whole list on the right-hand side. You can see the chart on the left. That represents the standard that was cited by OSHA within the fiscal year of 2024. I think it goes, October to October. Yeah. But anyway, you could see the numbers represented next to the bars. That shows you how many different citations were issued for the specific line item that we're looking at. So just going top down, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but there's a few points that I'd like to make. You can see the most cited within the general industry space was just shy of 1,100. That was machine guarding, and that's just types of guarding or guarding methods, which really is just showing that general guarding requirements weren't being maintained. Looking a little bit further, you got a couple of HazCom citations right after one another. Written program, not having a HazCom policy or program in place within your workplace. And then the next one would be information and training. So that means not just having your plan, but training to it and making sure that people understand how to execute on it. Going a little further, we got respiratory protection and specifically medical evaluations. I think most people that have respiratory protection plans in place understand you need medical evaluations and fit tests every single year. But they found 820 different times that people weren't doing these medical evaluations as they should. We got something that sort of couples with lockout, tagout next, machine guarding next, which is lockout, tagout, specifically having procedures developed. As a quick reminder on those, machine-specific procedures are required for every piece of equipment that services or maintained by your workforce. We've got power industrial trucks, the training aspect, which not the classroom setting, but the practical evaluation that goes along with that. After that, you got medical services and first aid, providing eyewash and body wash facilities if you have people exposed to injurious or corrosive chemicals or materials in the workplace. You got machine guarding, point of operation. You got respiratory protection, going back to that with fit testing. And then last but not least, you got hazard communication. So we got several on here, HazCom related, several on here, machine guarding, lockout, tagout related. So just putting that in perspective so you guys have an idea on that before we move on. Switching over to construction, this is a little bit larger of a gap in terms of what citations are being issued. And I'll tell you right now, and I think Phil would agree, what we're looking at, fall protection is always number one. We see it year in, year out, over and over again. Fall protection is an opportunity. 5,100 of these citations were issued specific to residential construction. Looking a little bit further down, we've got ladders and we've got eye and face protection that are sort of neck and neck right there. Then we move into fall protection again with training for those people. We've got head protection, which is simply just using hard hats, safety helmets, things like that. We've got another fall protection issue with unprotected sides or edges. We've got a couple here that maybe people haven't heard of with the general safety and health provision standards. I'll just touch on both of them together, but inspections by a competent person, that means you should have some sort of a process in place by someone who can recognize hazards and put together corrective actions or solutions in the workplace, doing inspections, documenting that, and training and educating, which is the second one, on the recognition and avoidance of these unsafe hazards. So those standards aren't commonly referenced in my opinion, but they're being cited by nature of OSHA going out and realizing that certain companies aren't doing as they should. Looking a little bit further, there's another fall protection, low slope roof work, and then aerial lifts, fall protections and things like your boom lifts.
One of the things that jumps out here is that there were more fall protection citations written in the construction sector than there were for all of general industry.
Yeah.
Like, that's amazing, right? Fall protection in construction, absolutely the most targeted exposure that OSHA has on the radar.
Yep. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to point out is I think what you guys are looking at here, and the thing that I want to point out to everybody on the call and here in person, is that you might be looking at this list and thinking, okay, we're doing all these things and we're doing a good job of it. But really what I'm getting at here is all these things more or less are pretty darn controllable. Things like wearing a hard hat. I mean, that's 101. That's basic things. OSHA finds a lot of low-hanging fruit when they go out there. So point being is understand these things, understand your companies, what your exposures are, what your compliance areas need to be, and focus on the little things, and everything else will sort of fall into place once you have your framework built. All right. So I think a lot of people here today probably have been a part of an OSHA inspection at some point in their career. So I always say, who's been blessed with an OSHA visit? I think a lot of people have. But what we're going to cover over these next few slides here, and I'm going to take the first few and then we're going to switch over to Phil. What we're going to cover here in our experience is what we see as the top 5 mistakes and how to avoid those things if and when OSHA comes onto a job site or into your facilities. So the first and honestly, in my opinion, most basic thing that we talk about here is when OSHA comes on site, a lot of times people get stressed out, rightfully so. A lot of time there's a lot of confusion. Maybe the safety person isn't on site. Maybe you don't have a dedicated safety person. But there's a lot of times a lot of confusion and lack of training or a plan in place. And that's 101 again, going back to the basics. And really the things that we're looking at here on this slide are everything you want in terms of prepping for it and executing when OSHA comes on site. So there's 3 main bullets on this slide. And first and foremost is having your procedures in place, right? Who's going to be designated to handle an OSHA inspection when someone shows up? How are you going to handle the opening conference? Where are you guys going to go through for the walkthrough? How are you going to handle the closing conference? What are your walkthrough strategies when they're coming through your facilities or navigating through a job site? And then how are you guys going to follow up, right? What are you going to do after the closing conference ends and that lovely 6-month waiting period that OSHA has to issue citations comes into play? I can't tell you how many clients I talk to and like, well, we haven't heard anything, so things might be going well. And it's might be true, but a lot of times it's not. Depending on what's coming through those local offices, it takes a little bit of time for them to, 1, talk with the area director on what they saw, and 2, come back with any citations or issues. So going back to the procedures for handling this inspection and talking about designees or responsibilities, you're always at least going to want to have a primary and a backup. It's totally reasonable for you guys to have OSHA come to a job site or come to your facility and say, hey, would you mind taking a seat in this conference room or in our job trailer? We need to gather the right people. We want to make sure that we're representing our company well and having the people that need to be here present. So pretty basic, but that's something that it's sort of the mentality that people think, OSHA hasn't been here. I think we're good. They're not going to come here. It's not true for everybody, but I think complacency is a factor in, not having a documented plan or people that are dedicated to the process. So just like you do with emergency action plans, you want to have the right people involved and something in place. Specific to the opening conference, the walkthrough, and the closing conference, for the opening conference, you want to have a dedicated space, somewhere quiet where you guys can focus, hear everything that OSHA has to say on why they're here, what they want to look at, what documents they might want to request. And for the walkthrough, I'm not going to get too much into the weeds here on this, but you want to have a plan for that as well. Take them through the most direct route possible. Other things that you might want to pause or stop doing while they're there, not to hide anything per se, but just be focused on that visit. And then last but not least, the closing conference. Most commonly, that's going to be the same space you hold your opening conference, but a dedicated space to clearly understand, what happened, what they're following up on, and what might actually come of that visit. The walkthrough strategy I talked about a little bit. Then the follow-up piece is really important. Like I said, OSHA has a lot of time to come back with any citations or any issues that come on site from their visit. You want to hit the ground early and often. If there's things you can't correct during the walkthrough, we'd always recommend doing that. But anything that you suspect or that they focused on or that you might need to gather, you want to follow up quickly, and you want to make sure that you pull all those things and make those corrective actions as soon as possible. So once you have your plan, once you know where you're going to go, what you're going to do, whose responsibilities are what, you want to make sure that everybody's sort of trained on it, right? You could do basic tabletop exercise. You could just talk through it generally. I'd recommend taking a look at that at least annually just to make sure if there's turnover or any new operations or changes that come into play within your organization, that it's accounted for and that people understand what to do and how to do it if and when OSHA shows up. Training is also going to talk about some communication strategies with OSHA and internally within your teams. And then last but not least, one of the other gaps that we see, and we'll talk a little bit about this in another mistake that we noticed a lot, is having the right tools in place. Everybody's got a cell phone now with cameras, but having a camera, maybe a measuring device, if you're in a construction account and you're trying to talk about excavations or something like that, you're going to want those. If you're looking at other heights or distances, you're going to want to make sure you have that as well. And then something as simple as pen and paper or flashlight. There might be other things here, but as a basis or a basic level of what you want to have on hand, that's going to be really important. And the other thing that I want to touch on too is it's not explicitly listed here, but if you guys don't have a good process for accessing your OSHA record keeping forms, your policies, your procedures, training records, any documentation revolving around your safety program and your safety culture, you should have that streamlined so that if and when it's requested, you can pull it efficiently. It's not going to necessarily save you, but it shows OSHA that you at least understand what you're doing and what your risks are.
Yeah, this is a drill, right? If you never did a fire drill and all of a sudden there was a fire, you would not be prepared for it if you didn't have a plan in place and some preparation. So same approach right here when OSHA shows up.
Okay, number 2. So there's a lot of different reasons OSHA might come on site. You'll see them in that sub bullet up on the screen here. But anytime OSHA comes onto a job site or into your manufacturing facility, warehouse, whatever it might be, you want to ask for their credentials and ask what they're there for. The bullet points underneath are imminent danger, complaints, fatalities or serious injuries. Everybody, I think, knows you have to report those. There's certain time requirements to report, hospitalizations, amputations, physical loss of an eye, or fatalities, obviously. There's programmed inspections, whether it's industry specific or emphasis program specific. And then you have your referrals. Complaints and referrals are very similar. Complaints just come from an internal source. Referrals come from an external source. So you want to understand what they're there for. You want to ask for their credentials. You want to kind of understand what the scope of this visit's going to be so that you can gather the right people and you guys know how to respond. Once they're there, once you guys do your opening conference and understand what's going on, they may ask for certain documents, certain policies, certain procedures. You want to start gathering those. So going back to those roles and responsibilities, having a designee or a group of people that can pull those things while you're focused on your walkthrough, understanding what OSHA is doing. It's really critical to make sure you can get those things quickly. OSHA is going to ask a lot of questions. They're going to point a lot of things out. They might point out some good things. They might point out some bad things. The important thing to note here on this third section of this left-hand document right here is that you want to be direct and you want to be objective. Try not to bring emotion into it. You want to stay focused. If they start talking about machine guarding, don't talk about how awesome your lockout tagout program is, right? All you want to do is answer questions as directly as possible and give them the information that they request. The last bullet point on here is very important as well. Don't admit fault, right? They're going to see what they're going to see. They're going to be able to make, they're going to be able to draw conclusions based on what they see and who they interview. Admitting fault's not going to do anything but hurt you guys. So just understand that you just want to take everything that they present to you, write it down. If you need to ask questions, that's totally fine. You never want to be like, you know what, Mr. Compliance Officer, yeah, you're right. I knew that I should have trained this person, but we got really busy. I'm not saying everybody here would do that, but in the moment, in the heat of the moment, when OSHA's on site, sometimes people let the tongue slip a little bit too much, and it ends up hurting them more than it does helping. So some pretty basic stuff here, but the overall theme of this slide is really understanding what they're here for, what those different categories mean, and making sure that you're staying focused throughout the entire process and following that inspection. So for this next one, sort of goes to executing on your plan, but a lot of times when OSHA's walking around, it's stressful, like I said earlier. I talked about asking questions. There's a couple of different bullet points on this slide on that. But generally speaking, anything OSHA does, anything OSHA asks, anything OSHA makes a point on, you guys want to make sure that you're taking notes. You want to take pictures. If they're looking at a process, you're taking a video. If they take their camera out, you take your camera out. If they take a note, you take a note. And it's okay if you don't know what they're writing down or what they're looking at. Ask them what they're looking at and why they're looking at it. You don't have to talk any more other than that, but you want to make sure that you have a clear understanding. If they're looking at a room or a construction site in general, it's possible they could be looking at any bunch of different things. You want to be focused and understand what they're doing and mimic that so that if and when it comes back to the time where you do get the citation, you can say, well, I don't remember talking about this whatsoever. We didn't even go to that area of the plant or that area of the construction site. It's not common, but it can happen, and you want to make sure that you have all that information. Couple of points on asking questions at the end in the closing conference. You can't ask for a summary of what they saw. They're not going to openly say, wow, you guys did great. No citations are being issued. Or on the flip side of the coin, they're not going to say, yeah, we're going to hit you with 5. Every time they come out on site, that compliance officer brings everything back to the area director. They have a review. There might be other people involved, but they talk about it. And from there, that's how they decide to issue citations or not. So going back to recording and documenting everything, if there's any sampling that they take place, whether it's noise, whether it's air monitoring, whether it's soil samples, whatever the case may be, you guys want to take the same exact thing from the same exact location using the same exact method. If people are being interviewed, document who's interviewed. If there's documents that are requested, jot those things down. And then on the back end of everything, if you're supplying anything to OSHA, save all your email correspondences, save all the documents that you've passed along via email, whatever the case might be. You want to have a nice paper trail and timeline of everything that happened and when it happened. All right. So this is my last slide. And I think I'm going to ask a rhetorical question here. So when do we want to contest a citation? And the answer is always every time. We have a couple of different options here, but generally speaking, a typical request for a contest is called an informal conference. And some of you guys may have gone through that. What you're going to do is you're going to take a look at your citations, the different violations on there. You're going to build your defense. You're going to say, hey, I know that you saw this today, or I know that you heard this today, but here's what we're actually doing. And we feel that either that fine amount should be reduced, or in a more difficult situation, that severity can be reduced. So if you work with customers that look at your OSHA inspection history, or you look at fines and violations, or even serious injuries, incident rates, mod rates, those types of things, this is another factor that they might be looking at. So that's where that severity lessening from this informal conference is a strategy if you need to have that. So I know in construction, sometimes it'll say, no subcontractors with serious violations within the past 3 years or 5 years, or whatever the case may be. It's harder to do, but there is a time and a place for that. And in short, you always, always, always want to contest whether you can get the fine down or the severity amount down. It's usually never both, or it really never both from what I've seen.
Well, it depends on, the validity of the alleged citation.
Right.
So it's always good. You want that informal conference, talk about it, come to a consensus with OSHA.
Yeah. And you have 15 days to do this, 15 working days to schedule this. So it's really important, like I said, being prepared, gathering everything, understanding what you need to present. It's very, very critical you get this request in as soon as possible so that you're prepared and you're ready to go. You don't miss that window. There is another option here called an expedited informal settlement agreement. I don't know if anybody here has gotten one of those. I don't know if anybody here has heard of one of those. Hopefully some of you guys have. There's a couple different pieces of criteria that I want to highlight on this because it's not a thing that happens every time, but I have seen it come across my desk with clients from time to time here. And from OSHA's perspective, there's got to be 4 criteria that are met. 1, it can't be a fatality situation. 2, it can't include a violation that is around a failure to abate a hazard. It can't be around a repeat citation or a willful citation. So most commonly you'll see this for a serious or an other than serious violation that didn't involve a fatality. With that said, if it is a serious violation, there's a high gravity or a serious violation that is basically immediately dangerous to life and health, that really, really could have hurt somebody or did hurt somebody. If you have more than 2 of those, you're not eligible for this EISA. And then last but not least, you can't have as a company any other cases in contest currently or any outstanding bills that you guys owe OSHA some money. So what this EISA is, or this expedited informal settlement agreement is it's a letter. And they say, hey, we're going to give you guys the option to pay this right away, no questions asked. It usually results in a 40% reduction in the fine amount. But the key with that is by getting this letter, you have to abate all the violations by the abatement date and prove that to OSHA. And then what you do is you pay that fine, and you pay that fine in full. Okay. On other cases, you can set up plans to pay these things, but just want to point that out that this is something that's a factor of that too. Ultimately, what happens after the expedited informal sell agreement is signed and executed upon, the area director takes a look at it and you get a go or no go. It's a letter that OSHA in good faith is offering the company the ability to pay this right away and get it done. And it might be a good option for you guys given the circumstances of your company, your OSHA history, and what the scenario is around the citation and the inspection. Beyond that, once your citations are executed, the fines are adjusted, the severity levels are adjusted. I think everybody knows you want to post those things. You want to communicate these violations and these citations company-wide. Another thing that we see is people don't necessarily understand that there's a kind of a rule that they look 5 years back, and they being OSHA, around what your company history was. And if you've got multiple job sites, if you have multiple job locations or manufacturing facilities, warehouses, those types of things, if they notice that there's some PPE issues at one location or some lockout tagout issues at another location, that applies company-wide. They view that you guys are expected to make that correction across the board. If and when they do come back out, even if it isn't at that same job or same location, what could happen is you guys could get a repeat or a willful citation, which Phil's going to cover later with fine amounts, and it exponentially increases not only the cost of that situation, but the red dot on your company and the severity and the magnitude of everything in the eyes of OSHA. So very, very important that you're communicating those things and you're applying changes company-wide, not just to that specific location that they visited. So that's kind of what I had to touch on this slide. But Phil, anything to add before I turn it over to you?
No, I mean, I would add that expedited informal settlement agreement, that proposed number, that discounted fine number, doesn't necessarily go away if you request the informal conference. So don't think that it kind of reads that way when you read through this actual citation. It kind of reads like, accept this now or it's gone forever.
Mm-hmm.
It's not actually gone forever. That number is still on the table, but you'll have the ability to further negotiate and understand exactly what needs to be done if you do the informal conference. So don't think that number goes away if you request an informal conference, because it doesn't.
Yeah, you get the letter and you're like, oh, I better do this right now.
It reads like, hurry up and pay this to make it go away, but it's not really in your best interest always.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. I'll turn it over to Phil.
Thanks, Kyle. So the next thing that we'll talk about here briefly is, again, these are just different mistakes we see employers make, right? As you're going through the OSHA citation process, a lot of times we see employers kind of overpromise what they'll do as far as an abatement, right? They'll overpromise. They'll try to get, oh, you want us to do this? We'll do this for everybody. When in fact, maybe you only need to do that for the affected employees, right? So sometimes we see folks overpromise. And if you overpromise, that's what you get held to. If you sign off on that as your abatement date or your abatement action, whether that's employee training or a timeline to get training done, whatever it is that you sign off on as your abatement plan, that's what you're going to be held to. And failure to meet those abatements, either the abatement type or the abatement deadline, is every year. It didn't make our top 10 list, but it's in one of the top 20 year over year for most frequently cited. It's failure to abate. Typically, it means you overpromised and underdelivered. And that happens sometimes because you don't realize maybe the scope. You say, yeah, we'll retrain everybody. And then you go, oh, wait a minute. We've got 3,500 employees in 6 states. Maybe I shouldn't have told them we would do that in a week. Maybe we should, right? You just got to take a step back and make sure that whatever you promise that you're going to do, it's reasonable for you guys to actually achieve that. So usually OSHA wants to see these types of things completed within 90 days from the date of the informal conference or the final agreement on the abatement. But what we'll see though is if you need more than 90 days, you can get it. You just have to have that discussion. Your abatement period and your abatement type are part of the negotiation that's conducted during the informal conference. So if you need more time, if you need a different class, if whatever the situation is, OSHA wants to see progress in good faith towards the safety and health of your employees. So as long as we're making that and we're headed in that direction, they'll usually give us more days. We might have to put together an intermittent safeguard. We might have to put together some type of a check-in to show progress, but usually they're pretty amenable to those types of things. Other corrective actions that sometimes will save you some paperwork is if you can do a corrective action while the compliance officer is on site. If there's something simple, they walk through your shop and you've got a bad fire extinguisher, a bad extension cord, something that's like, pick it up and replace it like right now on the spot, do those things. It doesn't guarantee that you will or will not be receiving a citation for having that unsafe condition, but it does prevent you from having to formalize your abatement process and submit abatement documentation. So it saves you some paperwork down the line if you can fix it right now when OSHA's on site doing that actual inspection. What types of stuff do you need to submit to OSHA as evidence of completion? It's a training record, it's a photo, it's a receipt of what you've purchased, right? It's usually common sense stuff that it's practical based on what the discussion had in regard to the citation. So it's an easy mistake to make to kind of overpromise, but that's one that it's easily avoided that we see pretty regular. Another easy mistake that employers make, or a common mistake, I should say, that employers make, is that we don't have our OSHA log updated and ready to go. Like Kyle kind of alluded to earlier, if you've got a plan together, you're going to have your log up to date, right? But a lot of clients, or excuse me, a lot of employers, I should say, they think that the OSHA log needs to be completed by February 1st because that's when they're going to hang it. That is incorrect. The OSHA log needs to be maintained year-round. After an injury occurs, you should update the log as soon as possible within a week. So don't think that, I'm just going to do my OSHA log in February and hang it up. That's not how that actually works. So if they come on site and your log is not updated with the most recent injuries, and it's within the time period where you're supposed to update them, they'll cite you for having an improper log. And that's, again, one of the top 20 recordables every year. Yeah, excuse me, one of the top 20 citations every year is either failure to maintain the OSHA log or failure to report an injury or fatality, which Kyle kind of alluded to earlier, right? Again, it's part of the plan, but that OSHA log should be a living document. So if you have had no injuries so far this year, that's awesome. You're off to a great start. You should still have a blank log with the date on it, the 2025 date, right? So there's your log. It's blank. Yep, you can give it to the compliance officer when they request it. If you tell them we haven't had any injuries, so we don't have a log, you're technically out of compliance. They should always have an OSHA log going.
One quick thing too, if you guys have injuries that happen at the end of the year, let's say December, right? Make sure you're going back and you're reviewing any lost time, any restricted work days, those types of things. We're not going to get into record keeping nuances, but it is a living document, so it's looking forward and back, right? You want to make sure that when you're posting in February, that everything is accurate to that point. So just quick.
Oh, great point. Great point. So we'll pop in here and we'll talk a little bit now about how to set yourself up for success when OSHA does allege that your company has a violation of the standard, right? So you get the letter in the mail. OSHA alleges that you have, in fact, violated a standard. What is it that you can do to defend yourself from that allegation, right? How to best position yourself. So there's a few different ways to look at your defense. But one of the things that you want to look at is what's the penalty? What could the penalty be? What's currently proposed as far as a fine amount? So the fines go up every year. This year, the maximum for a serious or other than serious violation is $16,550 per violation. That's the same number per abate. Excuse me, for a failure to abate. And one of the other things that we were talking about right there with that failure to abate, remember that's when you overpromised. This is one of the situations where OSHA can now fine you per day that you're out of compliance. So if you promised OSHA you get it done in a week, but in reality, this is going to take you a month, keep that in mind. They have the ability to fine you per day for a failure to abate. So negotiate your abatement terms wisely is all I'm trying to say. The other one here is a willful or a repeat, and those carry a maximum fine amount to 165,000 plus. And the reason for that is because this is an opportunity for OSHA to really leverage a financial penalty against an employer, whether it's a willful or a repeated. Again, the repeated is going to be it's actually a maximum of 10 times the original citation. So you can see here that your average OSHA inspection yields about 1.8 last year citations. So on average, you get 2 citations every time OSHA comes out and does an inspection. That can easily be a $30,000 tab, more or less, certainly. But on average, that's right. That's just kind of a little bit of a sticker shock to some people to think, oh, wow, it's a big number. And that's just average. So many inspections end up with 6 figures or more, while many inspections end up with no citations and fines. So just something to keep on the radar. As Kyle alluded to earlier, one of your best offenses is a good defense, right? So keep that inspection tour on track. Make sure that when we do have the compliance officer on site, that whatever they're there for is what we're showing them. And a lot of times you'll have a unique operation at your facility, or a compliance officer won't be familiar with the specific nuance of what you guys do. So they'll ask questions, right? Maybe you've got a complicated robotic system with machines and robotic machines and guarding. Maybe you're doing a complicated or nuanced construction project. If it's not kind of run-of-the-mill operation, or if this is the most unique part of your operation, the compliance officer are going to have questions about it, because there can't be experts in everything. So feel free to put a safety lens on that operation and explain to them why it's safe and how it's safe, because they're going to have questions and take pictures. And again, the compliance officer that's there on site in the field, like Kyle said, is going to go back and meet with the area director, and they're going to determine if they believe that there be any violations of the standard. If you've explained to the compliance officer on site why this is a safe operation and how it works, and what physical guards there are, as well as work practice and procedures there are that make it safe, and you get that compliance officer to understand that no one's been hurt here, no one's going to get hurt here, that's the message that goes back to the area director, is that this is a buttoned up operation. I don't believe there'd be any citations here. So it's that cadence to be able to explain that. And again, having a plan and kind of, executing on the plan helps to set you up for that. And then when you do have a concern, when the compliance officer does have a concern, if you can fix it right away, just fix it right away. You're not admitting guilt. You're saying, if you don't think that's safe in the interest of safety and health, I'll make an adjustment. Although it wasn't something that I necessarily agreed with, that's okay. If you think this is the right thing to do, I'll go ahead and do it. And we can discuss it again later. Or I can tell you more about why this is actually a safe practice later. And what I'm trying to say here is, don't be combative with the compliance officer, right? Don't just understand they're there to do an inspection, right? And you're there to facilitate the inspection, but also you want to make sure they understand what's safe and why it's safe. But don't be afraid to make immediate corrections when that compliance officer does see something that they don't think is aligned with the regulations. So we've got a couple of other things here. When you do have a citation, there's kind of 2 ways that it can go, right? We can get what's called the citation multiplier. OSHA has the ability to, in fact, have one unsafe condition and cite you per employee exposed, right? We don't see this very often. It's typically only when there's a serious injury, fatality, something that really, really goes wrong. It's got to be a high gravity violation. So it's got to be something significantly wrong. So for example, if you had 10 plumbers working in a deep trench, they were all unprotected, and if they're actually in a few different trenches at the same job site, OSHA could potentially fine you per each plumber on site. So instead of one 16,000 plus penalty, they could levy a $165,000 penalty. They very rarely do this. They very rarely do this, but they do have it in writing as part of their inspection process that they have the authority to do so. What we see more frequently than this, though, is where OSHA likes to group citations, right? You'll have 10 plumbers in a deep trench. OSHA will come out and they'll say these were the citations: failure to provide cave-in protection. The trench box was set improperly, and the trench box was installed improperly. Right? And they give you 3 citations, right? But the abatement action for all 3 citations is the exact same thing, right? If the box was set properly, and then there would be nobody exposed. So if your abatement action, one abatement action solves all 3 different citations, those are what we call duplicative citations, and OSHA needs to delete those. OSHA is not supposed to, and they really can't legally enforce duplicative citations. So if there are 3 or 10 citations and the corrective action is actually just one action, that's it. We should only be getting cited under one standard. And the reason OSHA likes to group them is because they're technically all right? Like I was the employer, my guys were in the trench. Or let's say another one we see commonly where there's a duplicative citation is under the respiratory protection standard, right? The fit testing, the medical evaluation, the employee training, the record keeping, like all of those things get grouped, right? And because an employer didn't have an effective respiratory protection program, all of those things, right? That there could get 20 citations under the respiratory standard, right? But what you want to do is make sure that if it's one corrective action, like implement a respiratory protection program, if that's the corrective, that's the abatement, then we should really only be cited once under it. And OSHA should cite us only under the most serious actual citation. So what we don't want to have is, back to my trenching example, I agree that, okay, yes, all 3 of those were correct citations because, let's be honest, all 3 conditions existed. OSHA issues me 1 fine, but the 3 citations stand. So I get a citation for a serious failure to provide trench protection, failure to provide cave-in protection. I get another serious for the improper setting of the box, and another serious for the box not being inspected. I get 3 serious fines, but only 1 carries a penalty. The other 2 are listed as 0 penalty. You do not want to accept that as the employer. That is unacceptable, because what you've just done is open yourself up to the potential for repeat or willful citations in the future, because you've now signed off and agreed that these 3 were all true. So it's in your best interest to make sure OSHA deletes anything that's duplicative. But it takes you pushing back. OSHA wants those all grouped because, in their opinion, it's in the employee's best interest for their safety and health to have all of those on the employer's record, because that way the employer could potentially be held accountable in the event it occurs again. You got to look at both sides of the coin here to some extent. So that's what you want to make sure that we're doing, though, is that if OSHA is looking to group citations, sometimes it is appropriate, but oftentimes what they're doing is putting duplicative citations together. And as an employer, you want to push back on that to make sure you're only being cited once when the corrective action is the same for multiple citations. Another affirmative defense you've got is the employee misconduct defense. An employer has an employee misconduct defense, which basically says you as the employer are not a babysitter, right? OSHA gets it. You can't watch everybody every minute of the day. So there are 4 elements you must demonstrate and have well documented to utilize this defense. And the first one is that you've got a written safety rule that applies to the activity. The second one is you've trained employees on the rule. And by trained, I mean you have written training documentation. It usually includes verification of comprehension, which is a test or hands-on. Then you've got inspections. You've got record that you inspected the workplace to ensure that the training stuck, that the rule is being enforced. And then you've also got to have a record that says when we found a violation of the rule due to our inspection, there was a disciplinary action, right? You got to have all 4 elements to establish an employee misconduct defense. But this is part of your safety and health program, which it should be. You should be able to establish these 4 elements relatively easily. So let's look at a quick example. OSHA cited a company for an employee not wearing a personal protective equipment. If the employer had the evidence that they had a written policy that talked about PPE, that the employee who was identified during the inspection had received training to wear the PPE, if the employer conducted audits to make sure that employees wore the PPE, and that when they did find somebody who wasn't wearing the PPE, there was a disciplinary action program, right? Right up, and it's got to be in writing. So a couple of things that people usually get wrong here, or that employers usually get wrong, is they don't document the disciplinary action. You holler at somebody, you get them to put their PPE on, but there's no actual record that it occurred. If you don't have a record, in OSHA's eyes, it didn't happen. They also are not going to buy if you're trying to make the argument, well, we have all the elements, but we've just never caught anybody not wearing their PPE. If OSHA comes out and you're telling them that, yeah, we do monthly inspections, and we've been doing monthly inspections for 10 years, and they come out and you don't have a record that nobody ever forgot safety glasses or earplugs or a hard hat, they're not going to buy it. They're going to say your inspections are ineffective, right? Don't tell me that the one day I came out in the past 10 years just happens to be the one day that nobody's wearing the PPE. That's why you've got to have the documentation for it. So that's kind of how that goes. You've got to have the documentation for it to make sure that it's well accepted. Last thing that we're going to talk about here is a multi-employer worksite. Now, a multi-employer worksite is basically OSHA's written standard that they will cite more than one employer if another employer exposes your employees to hazards. So if you're on a construction site, there's a bunch of different general contractor and subcontractors on the same site, and that's going to be a multi-employer worksite. However, if you're a machine shop and you hire somebody to pave your driveway or your parking lot, or hire somebody to re-roof your building, you're also going to create a multi-employer job site when you bring in a contractor like that. So it's industry agnostic, because all companies at some point in time will have a multi-employer work site just because of the vendors you hire or the building maintenance that you do need. So we're going to focus on the fourth one right here, which is the controlling employer. The first three here, creating, exposing, or correcting employers, are just like they sound, right? You had somebody that works for you and they were exposed to a hazard, or you guys made the hazard, or you're supposed to correct it. But the controlling employer has a duty of care, if you will, right? They have to meet what's called a reasonable care standard. And that reasonable care standard talks about, do we do inspections? And that's really what the OSHA standard for the multi-employer citation looks at when we look at reasonable care. So for example, you operate a machine shop, you hire a company to re-roof your shop, and while they're re-roofing the shop, a guy falls through a skylight and there's a fatality. They're on your roof. Do you have any liability or any exposure to an OSHA citation there? And the answer is potentially yes. What if that same roofing contractor cuts a hole in the roof and drops debris down and it strikes one of your employees and kills them? Do you have some responsibility there? The answer is yes, you do. As that controlling contractor, the one who had control of the actual multi-employer area, you're responsible to do some level of inspection and due diligence for your work partners. So when we talk about the reasonable care standard, it really goes into the criteria of, did I review this company's history of compliance with OSHA citations? And did I review this company's history of safe work? If you're unfamiliar, you need to do inspections on that subcontractor, contractor, vendor, whoever it is that's going to be working in the same space as you. And that's what we call the reasonable care standard. And to meet that criteria, you really have to do some inspections to establish that, yes, they were working safely, or if they weren't working safely, that they were able to correct the issues you identified in a timely manner. So those are just a few different ways to help defend yourself or your company from an OSHA citation, right? You got to be prepared for it. You've got to absolutely set yourself up for an employee misconduct defense. And then in the instance where you've got several other employers working with you, you've got to establish, hey, who's going to be in charge of safety and what's going to happen when your work activities put my employees in danger. So getting those things all set up and established before an OSHA inspection is going to be the way to help defend yourself in the event that a citation is issued. So bringing it back home here, Kyle, we talked a little bit about the most frequently cited. You ran through that. We talked about some of the top mistakes that employers make when dealing with the OSHA inspection process. And then we hit on a couple of different defense strategies. So with that, I'm going to check the chat box for any questions. And if anybody has any questions here in the room, if you want to write them down or answer them, raise your hand. We'll take them one at a time right now.
We've got three.
You've got three, Kyle. Go ahead and read them out loud for me if you can.
All right. First question. In my past, I have asked the OSHA compliance officer to provide a list of documents they are requesting, in which they normally allow 2 to 3 days to provide those documents. This allows us the opportunity to run those documents past legal counsel prior to providing. Is your advice to provide documents on the spot, or do you recommend gathering the requested documents after the visit and providing after legal counsel review?
I'll give you my opinion on it, Kyle, and you can weigh in as well. I would say typically don't provide them on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
You've got some time to provide the documentation to OSHA. You don't have to, you're not legally required to provide anything right here this very minute. So I say don't. Gather everything up.
I agree. And I think this question probably came because I was saying have it ready to go, send out. Within that window, reasonable amount of time to get it to them. That way you can talk about it internally. I completely agree.
Yeah. You just want to make sure that what we're sending them is exactly what they're asking for and nothing more.
All right. Second question. On the slide about penalties, was the figure for willful or repeat violations 165, 554 per violation? I think it's 550, but anyway, close enough. Yeah, yes, 165,000. And
yep. Yeah, so that was per violation. Yeah, so one willful violation can cost 165,000 and change. Mm-hmm. One repeat violation can also cost that much as well.
Anything from the room?
New administration changing in OSHA hacking employers, is that going to be, sometimes it changes between administrations, is that going to change much, do you think?
So for everybody online, the question was, with the change in administration, will there be a different stance from OSHA or a more aggressive stance? Yeah. We're not really in a great position to answer that or predict the future. As far as funding goes for OSHA, I have not seen anything as far as increases or decreases in their funding. So I would anticipate it to kind of be status quo for the time being.
Okay. Got a few more in the chat. I read that it was approved for OSHA to use AI glasses to record their walkthroughs. How do you handle that?
So I'll tell you how I would respond to that. So if OSHA would like to take a video clip while they're on site, I typically limit that video clip to one specific activity or action. Mm-hmm. I do not allow them to have just a GoPro or whatever, just an ongoing video camera for the entire inspection. The reason is it just, if they're there in the employee's interest, in the interest of employee safety and health, and they don't believe there to be an employee exposed to a hazard while they're on site, I don't believe it's fair to the employer for them to then go back and zoom in on something that was in a corner that an employee may not have been exposed to, but that may not align with what the standard says. So typically, I don't let the compliance officers operate video cameras continuously. I tell them, if you'd like to take a video clip, you're welcome to, and they have the right to. But I would reserve the right for them to take a full video clip or a full video walking tour. And that's in a manufacturing facility. On a construction site, you don't really have an opportunity to push back. They'll quite often have the video camera already running as they approach the construction job site. So that's typically already happening, and you don't really have the ability to direct that action.
Yeah, instant replay for the plain sight doctrine, right? Good question. The next one we've got is, are forklift drivers allowed to use radios or headphones? Are you asking for music or what? For communication, I guess, to clarify the question.
So there's nothing in the standard that specifically prohibits radios or headphones. From a safe work practice standpoint, those are distractions.
Yeah.
Right. So it's up to a company individually to determine whether or not they're going to allow their operators to wear headphones or listen to the radio or whatever else they're going to do. I've always, been a fan of the radio at a reasonable volume is reasonable, but if you can't hear somebody else who's calling out in the event of an emergency, that's absolutely a safety issue.
Yeah, most companies I see don't permit it, but preference. Good question. Next one we've got, I am employed by a very small, very young company that doesn't have an established safety department. What would you suggest is the most important thing to focus, or the most important things to focus on if we are starting the safety initiative from nothing? And I think this is a follow-up. Do you have any standard forms or suggested forms that coincide with OSHA regulations that you can provide? I mean, the first question is, it's a lot to unpack. I mean, I always tell clients that I work with or prospects or whoever that you want to establish a good framework. And by doing that, obviously to the second part of this question, there's a list of requirements that are outlined within the standards. So you want to set that framework and you want to establish roles and responsibilities. What a lot of companies do that are lean or don't have a huge overhead from an employee perspective is they'll put together a safety committee. This answer to this question can easily be a 2-hour conversation. So I'm going to try to keep it pretty light, but generally I'd say focus on what you want to accomplish at minimum from a compliance perspective. Remember, OSHA is the bare minimum, right? You want to start there, but then you want to figure out ways to evolve and truly, go above and beyond to protect your workforce, protect your company's bottom lines. So I'd say understand what you need to have in place from a written program perspective, from a training perspective, understand who's going to execute on that. Once you have those things in place, it's kind of trial by error, in my opinion, especially if you're starting new. You're going to learn what's working well, what's not working well, communication strategies, learning strategies, practical training versus classroom training only, not just showing videos. There's a lot of different things that we could get into, but I'd say understand what you need to look at from a 1910 or 26 standard perspective. Talk to peers within your industry, understand what they're doing. Maybe leverage some internal resources and look to external ones that you can. There's a lot of different things that we can do and vendors we can refer that'll help you guys. So it's a big task, but it's definitely doable and just takes some time and a heck of a lot of effort. Miss anything there?
No, that's a very open-ended question. We could spend all day on that one.
All right. And to answer the question around the forms, yes, we have things that we can provide. So if you guys, I don't know how we're handling this per se, but if you want follow-up from us, let us know. We can get you those materials. There is one more question that I'm seeing in the chat, and it says, if an OSHA officer comes on site and presents an expired credential, do I have to allow them in for the inspection? I've never seen this.
You don't have to allow them in for the inspection if they have an expired credential. There have been, it's on the books that people have impersonated OSHA compliance officers and attempted to conduct an inspection and then issue citations and levy fines. They would not be the first person to try this. I know it sounds like a very bold move. And don't get me wrong, it is you're impersonating an officer, a federal officer. It's a punishable crime. But we have heard of that and seen that before. So I would, in that particular circumstance, call the area office, have them connect with somebody else from OSHA to verify their identity. There are other ways that you could verify their identity to allow them on site. That would be my advice, is to verify their identity some other way.
Yeah, even if it is a valid credential, you can turn them away. We don't really recommend that, but the short answer is yes, but there's a better process for it. So got a few more flying in here. As a general contractor, is it up to you to train subcontractors on site, or do you request documentation that their employees have the proper training to be on site?
Yeah, I'll jump on that one. So it's not actually your responsibility to train them on site. It's your responsibility to make sure that they're working safely through inspections. If they don't have the appropriate training or they're not working safely, it's your responsibility to stop them from completing the activities that are putting them at risk.
Yeah. I've seen some GCs do toolbox talks, maybe a JHA, JSA type of a thing. But to Phil's point, yeah, it's the responsibility is on the site.
Yeah, and a lot of times you'll see site-specific orientation for construction projects, and that should cover site-specific nuance that's different than, the last job site they were on. So where's the nearest hospital? What's the emergency response procedure at this job site? Is there a tornado shelter at this job site? any other specific rules you have that might be above and beyond OSHA compliance or nuanced to your project.
Couple more. When will GHS hazard ratings be given in safety data sheets? How do we train those hazard ratings when they are not printed on the SDSs? I'm sure I know.
Yeah, I'm not sure I fully understand that. The GHS labeling system is currently a part of the safety data sheets.
Yeah.
So that should be included. I can't recall exactly which section it is off the top of my head, but that is included in the safety data sheet. So you should be able to reference the safety data sheet and then identify what type of a hazard that is and the appropriate steps.
It may be talking about HMIS or NFPA triangles that used to be on there, but the GHS standard removed that and has a strict format that it follows now. All right, last one. Is there a seminar that's available to get a better understanding of logging the OSHA 300A correctly?
There are, yeah, we do OSHA record keeping workshops as well, but you can find them online as well through a variety of vendors. There's a tutorial for how to do it on the OSHA website, which is useful. I'm gonna go on the record and say it is useful. But I see some people in the room shaking their heads like not that useful, Phil. But that's okay. There is a tutorial there. But if you have a specific question, you can certainly reach out to somebody at Hub. We can help you walk through part of that. That would be my advice, is to reach out to somebody at Hub or try to find the tutorial online.
There's one last one, and I think we have time for this last one, and that's probably it.
Yeah, we're up against the clock. If anyone's got to jump right at 10, I'd ask you to go ahead and complete the feedback survey for the folks in the room as well as online. And we'll keep answering questions here just in case anybody has to jump right here at 10 o'clock. I was going to make sure I threw that QR code up there for everyone to complete. So, sorry, go ahead, Kyle. What was the last question?
We got a bonus now. We utilize a safety training platform. Is it best practice to have employees' signatures in a classroom training setting, or is it okay to add the names in the platform? I think both are fine. Yeah,
you can have an electronic record of the training. If that's what you're asking, it doesn't actually have to be a physical signature. There needs to be some type of a login or unique identifier for each employee that took the course, so that you can, again, provide the documentation to OSHA as to who actually took it. You can't just say that all employees took it without any type of a sign-in or other unique identifier, because they're going to say, well, what if that employee was absent the day of the training? How was the makeup training handled? So you do need either names or ID numbers or some type of a email or a unique identifier.
Another question here on multi-employer job sites, and it's talking specifically about temporary workers. And it says, for example, if a violation cited pertains to a temporary worker, would both the temp agency and the employer be cited?
The answer is it depends.
Yeah.
There's absolutely an opportunity for the temp agency and the host employer to be cited when we have temp employees on site. It just depends.
Yeah. Yeah. There's usually a dual responsibility from a training perspective. Basic training from a temp agency, job specific, site specific, company specific from the employer. And then same goes for record keeping. It goes on one or the two, but a lot of times the host facility. Let me pass this up. I'll leave this one with you while I walk through.
Yeah. Sure.
What is the best advice you can give someone who's on the path to becoming their company's safety manager?
Ooh, what is the best advice I can give someone, huh? I would say just be curious and identify, first of all, what standards are going to apply to your operation. But I would start off with being curious. Try to get your arms around all the things that you need to do. I think Kyle had a great point earlier when he said, reach out to your industry peers, industry association partners, try to figure out what others are doing in your space. There are plenty of template safety and health programs that you can download from a variety of sources across the internet. Of course, Hub has some as well, but you can also reach out to your insurance carrier partners and any other safety and health vendor or PPE supplier that you might utilize. They've all got a bunch of resources that are low cost or no cost. They can really kind of help you get your feet. Take some safety management courses. Try to find, there's some through the OSHA outreach program that are designed for safety management professionals. Not just compliance, but also safe meets the eye.
Yeah, I think one organization, even new or tenured, it's not a lot of studies that are useful. So that might be a good place to start on top of everything Phil said.
Yeah, quick question. In your opinion, is there substantial benefit to going down the path of like the VPP program for some sort of voluntary protection?
Yeah, so the question was, is there, in our opinion, is there a substantial benefit to being part of the VPP program? VPP is OSHA's voluntary protection program. There absolutely is. There absolutely is. It is a little bit of I'll just be honest, it's kind of a heavy lift to get enrolled. But the great news is that once you're enrolled, OSHA will come out and they'll do continuous site inspections for you at no cost. And you will not be cited for anything they find on site while they're on site while you're enrolled. So that's the absolute benefit, is that you've mitigated the risk of an OSHA inspection that yields, surprise citations. The challenge is that when they come out and identify something that needs to be corrected, you must correct it.
Mm-hmm.
But let's be honest, you're going to have to do that if they came out and did an inspection anyways. So it's not as, some people will throw that out there as that, but then you got to fix everything they say. Well, you got to do that anyways. They're only enforcing the standards. So I would say, yes, it's absolutely worth it. We've got several clients enrolled in it, and it helps move the bar from compliance to what I'll call best practices in risk management, because you're no longer worried about just hitting compliance goals. You can then think about safety management systems and kind of move upstream. Voluntary protection program.
Are there restrictions on industries that can participate in?
There are guidelines for size as well as head count and a few other guidelines. Every company will not be eligible for it.
So for a multi-employer site, so like we have a lot of big things going on in the cities right now. If they're coming on to site for a specific reason, what do you suggest for the other contractors that are on that same site? Like if they're going inside of the building to look at the HVAC contractor view, and there's all these other people around them, what's your recommendation on how do they handle that, the other contractors? Because I assume as they're walking through, it opens up everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. I would say that needs to be part of your plan.
Yeah.
Most companies we see with a plan, they're not going to completely stop work because OSHA showed up, but they're going to be mindful of what they're doing. So that's kind of up to you exactly what it is that you think would be safe to continue doing. The fact is, if you have a good, strong safety program and a strong inspection program and a high level of confidence that what the other sub-trades or contractors on site are doing, that I already know they're all doing that with the T's crossed and the I's dotted, then you're in a good spot. If you're not certain, then that's your lack of preparation, and it might cost you a day in schedule because it might be in the best interest not to have that. So it's up to you. I would recommend being prepared for it, though.
Do you hear of a lot of pushback on the employee misconduct defense where you provided training, but they say that, okay, well, you provided training, but they still did this, so it was ineffective training?
Yeah. So the question was, do we get a lot of questions about if the training wasn't adhered to, is the effectiveness of the training then called into question? And the answer is, well, the answer is yes, right? If you provided training and it wasn't adhered to, your response as the employer needs to be retraining and disciplinary action with the intent of changing the behavior, changing the culture of the workforce, if you will, to comply. And at some point in time, I know it's a hard thing to say, but if you have a subset of your employees who are consistently not going to adhere to the expectation, you need to hold them to the same level as if the quality of their work wasn't at the same level you needed it to be day in and day out. Mm-hmm. And so that might lead you to look for other opportunities for them or something similar.
Yeah. No, if there's, I would say the same thing. If there's, say you got 5 employees on a job and one guy's doing something wrong, and the rest are doing it right, they dig into your training to the T, you've got knowledge checks, you've got proof of your inspections, any follow-up trainings, those types of things, I think you got a better defense. But if they're all doing something incorrectly or your training has gaps, obviously there's some holes in your story there. The misconduct defense is hard to prove in general, in my opinion.
Your OSHA
300 log, does that have to be site specific, or you know, some jobs take 2 days, some takes 2 months, they just carry that around with them each foreman, or? And then is there a difference between 0 to 10 employees and 11 on, say 11 to 20? Do you have to do anything different reporting to OSHA besides if an accident happens?
So that's like a 5-part question for
Yeah.
everybody online. The question is specific to OSHA record keeping and the OSHA logs, as far as do they need to be on a construction site or one per establishment? Is that,
Yeah, like in the office or shop, or, you know, they need to be on site, don't they?
typically, what we'll see a contractor do is have one OSHA log for the entire company for the year.
Okay.
There are times where a contractor is looking to keep additional metrics on site, and they want to know what types of injuries were associated with a specific site or location.
Okay.
And so they'll have an additional log, but at the end of the year, it sums up into one.
Okay.
Yeah. For manufacturing, warehousing, fixed location type situations, OSHA's definition for establishment is separate physical locations with different or the same, I guess, job function. If you have 10 or more different establishments, you're going to want to do that as well. Maintain a separate one. Record keeping's fun. There's a lot of different issues that it's not. I know. It's few words I would describe it with other than that, but it's difficult is what I'm getting at. So the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it, the easier it gets. Nothing left in the chat.
All right. Well, if that's it, everybody, I know we're over on time, but I appreciate everybody sticking around. If you don't mind taking the survey for us, in the survey, if you'd like us to reach out to you, if you have any other specific questions, there is the opportunity to put some questions in there and your email address, and somebody from Hub will reach back out to you. So thank you all very much for your time this morning. Everybody, I hope you have a great day and a safe day.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.